Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So yes, the party must have been very good. I'm jealous I wasn't there, and I apologize for that, my loss. There was a very unfortunate clash of timing yesterday. In Brussels, we had something called the Next Generation Internet Summit, which was a very important event, but it didn't really have to be yesterday. It certainly shouldn't have been the first day of EuroDIG, so I had to fly late last evening. But the fact that we have competing events going on shows just how important these issues of internet governance and the future of the internet are. And Next Generation Internet, which we are calling this activity, the future of the internet, has become central to many organizations, but also to many of the policy lines that we are pursuing. I think it's crucial that here in EuroDIG, you recognize the role that you have and that the multi-stakeholder model has with regard to the issues which we're going to discuss hopefully today and beyond today. Because it is a clear sign, even from what was a supposedly high-level event yesterday, that the most important and interesting thing from the Next Generation Internet Summit, where we had vice presidents, where we had ministers and ex-ministers, was that, of course, they were all reliant on input from stakeholders. So the Futurium REI Search, who had organized that event yesterday, have launched a key online consultation. We, the European Commission, have already launched a consultation, an activity that we will be continuing, and we want to engage with numerous stakeholders in the internet area in order to make sure that we get this right. Because already the indications from the consultations, they are actually quite worrying. It is easy to put the emphasis on the negative, but we do have to recognize the concerns that are expressed about certain issues surrounding the internet today so that we can actually address those. But more importantly, so that we can address those in a way that will not hamper the development of the internet, that will not in any way stifle all the very positive socioeconomic good and benefits which we know that the internet brings, but also is destined to bring in the future. We have already indications that users, many users, 1 in 2 in Europe, limit their online activities because of concerns about trust or security. People limit their profiles, they limit their exposure to the various platforms, social and economic platforms that exist. People have fears about inclusiveness, and there are also indications that those with a lower education profile are to a significant extent excluded from many of the benefits of the internet, which can in itself become a vicious circle about social empowerment, education and development. So all of those issues, we can't blame the internet, and we're not going to allow others to do so, but we have to recognize that these issues exist and make sure that addressing them is a key central part to what we do in the future. Because otherwise the digital divide will become a permanent reality and will actually prevent the harnessing of the benefits of the internet. Already we have issues concerning digital skills, which of course also has implications for the jobs of the future, and again, the way in which Europe's economies and societies can embrace the internet and use it to its maximum effect. Closer to my home, closer to the work that I do, that has a significant negative impact on trying to accomplish a number of policy goals that the European Commission has set for itself. Central to the work that we are doing at the moment is the digital single market. We launched a strategy 2 years ago, and just recently, in May, the Commission issued a midterm review. It looked at its own homework and said, how well are we doing? And of course, we exposed ourselves to comment and suggestions from others. And while we have achieved, the Commission has made a number of proposals. Nevertheless, it is clear that there is an awful lot to do. If we are actually to take some of the steps, some of the regulatory steps, but also some of the many non-regulatory steps that are required to ensure that, for example, the regulation of privacy, the protection of personal data is embedded in the way that we do business, in the way that we regulate the internet, in the way that we encourage internet activity, but also so that online activities, e-commerce and others can flourish to the benefit of the economy, while at the same time protecting the individual and ensuring that European values are preserved. And it is really about that, something which was discussed yesterday. People were not afraid to say that we must talk about European values. We must differentiate, we must take a high-level approach in order then to look in very practical terms, what does that mean in the way that we engineer the internet, in the way that we design regulation insofar as that there is regulation, but we design a policy framework, but also the incentives that we give to people for inclusiveness, for education, etc. But that inclusiveness, the distribution of power, solidarity, are all issues which could differentiate the way that we approach the internet here in Europe compared to other regions of the world. And of course we can engage with those other regions on the strength of that approach in order to help development elsewhere. For all of those reasons, and in line also with a lot of work that we've done in the past with regard to research into technology and innovation, the Commission has launched our Next Generation Internet Initiative. That seeks to identify the areas of development, what work we need to do, but also to rebuild trust in the internet in order, as I've said, for us to be able to harness the positive elements for society and for economic development. A key element to this Next Generation Internet Initiative, and by the way, we will give prizes to somebody who can come up with a better name, but let's not get focused on titles, is that we want to make it human-centric. We want to put the human, the individual, at the center of the internet. What does that mean? And again, some questions were asked yesterday, but I think EuroDIG is really a place where we need to have that discussion. Putting the human at the center means that we already address what was one of the key findings from our consultations, from the consultations of REI Search, and from previous surveys, such as the Eurobarometer in 2015, which showed us that people feel disconnected, or certainly they feel out of control. They are not in control of the technology, the services. They are serving some other purpose. They are serving some other process rather than internet or these technologies serving them. Now, I think a lot of you in your own way have come across the same findings in different ways. So how do we put the human at the center? When we associate that with the very strong personal data protection law that now exists in Europe, we can see already that if we put a safe barrier around an individual's data, give the individual the right to control and say who has or has not their data, who can process or cannot process the data, how much data do I wish to make available, and we make it easier for a unique electronic identity controlled by the individual to be that person's gateway, their way of entering into or interacting with different platforms, different services, different manifestations of the internet. So that is something with our General Data Protection Regulation, for example, that we can now aspire to. This is one of the reasons why the Commission persisted with the e-privacy regulation in order to make sure that the communications element of electronic communications was also protected, was also ensuring safety of individuals' data. Now, I could emphasize more and more and speak for a long time about personal data protection, but there are other elements, such as, for example, the values which we espouse, which are clearly rooted in the European treaties, with regard to respect for others, with regard to development, using this tool for articulating and actually implementing development policy to help lesser developed societies and individuals. And to do all of that, of course, the bureaucrats in Brussels can do all of that on their own. Not. You know this, we know this. We have to have a very modest and realistic understanding of what are the limits to our ability to act, the role, the leverage which the multi-stakeholder organizations rooted in these values, but operating and relating to others across the world in the internet ecosystem, the role that must be played by the multi-stakeholder model in order to actually give effect to this. Whether it is at the engineering level and DNS SEC, something very tangible and real, or whether it is in the way in which discussions about internet governance take place at international level. All of those things can only be done in the multi-stakeholder environment that has already been created, and where governments or regulatory organizations like the Commission have some role, but actually a relatively minor role to play. Having said that, we must of course recognize the role of government in a positive sense. We must also anticipate the risks that some of the current challenges to the internet, to the use of the internet, actually pose for the multi-stakeholder model, and actually also incorporate that into our thinking about the next generation internet. If I take in particular the recent scares about cybersecurity, nothing new, but more dramatic, actually also perhaps more frequent, certainly in the public eye, and therefore we must analyze and anticipate the reaction to that. Allied to the identification of the use of various internet tools and platforms by terrorists, you have the perfect storm. You have a legitimate state and government interest, which, unless it is counterbalanced by different views, might, in seeking to address those problems, those very serious issues, which legitimately must be addressed, you have to have a counterbalance with regard to the freedoms and the different ways that one can, for example, address cybersecurity, whether it is the issue of encryption or whether it is the issue of maintaining the ability to maintain one's privacy while engaging online. So we have to ensure that technological evolution, but also regulatory developments, particularly at national level, at the level of governments and also governments together, reflect and are appropriately guided by the governance models that we wanted to put in place, but of course many of which are already in place. The European Commission has engaged with you, the stakeholders. EuroDIG is our key partner in this, but I must ask and stress that we need you to move out of the comfort zone that perhaps we were all in for a few years with regard to certain issues like IANA transition and other issues which are still important, which still have a reason, but where we must now move on to some of the more current challenges and which may require an adaptation of the way that we work, the way that we discuss, but also that you engage fully and seek to engage the partners that you work with at local level, at regional level, at sectoral level, in different interest groups, so that they too are all engaged in this process to make sure that the vision that we put forward for the next generation internet is indeed something that reflects our values, that does take account of different views, but also has a realistic and therefore good chance of actually working, and so that the technology doesn't come to dominate us, and those who would seek to impose a state-only solution do not win out either. So there you are. That is the vision of the Commission with regard to next generation internet. We have a lot of work to do on the details. Again, we need your input. There will be consultations ongoing. We're starting off with work to do research on technology, but also to federate groups, to identify startups, new groups that we have not previously had dialogues with. Again, your help is essential, so that over the next 18 months, in parallel with our work on research, we will actually have, by 2019, an up and running next generation initiative in the sense of an ongoing program. I want you to be part of that. Thank you very much for listening to me.